When we talk about griefing in Souls games, what exactly do we mean? Merriam-Webster defines griefing as the word you've entered isn't in the dictionary. Click on a spelling suggestion below or try again using the search bar above. Urban Dictionary, the People's Dictionary, defines griefing in several varieties, one of which gets us a little closer. In online gaming, someone who takes pleasure in creating grief for an opponent via various cheap tactics. That's pretty good, but I want to suggest my own definition of griefing. Using underhanded or unsporting tactics to deliberately provoke, upset, terrorize, maim, kill, or otherwise torture a target with the intent to cause grief. In my definition, I am aiming for broad applicability, but also specifically removing the prerequisite that the griefer takes pleasure in what they're doing. I am of the mind that you do not need to like griefing to grief, but for something to qualify as griefing, you must at least be doing so intentionally. In the Souls series, griefing takes several forms. More specifically, it means different things to different people. To some, the act of invading is griefing. The idea that someone would invade the world of another to deliberately disrupt their process could easily cause grief. But is that griefing? Does it fit the definition? Well, I think it's fair to say invading on its own isn't inherently underhanded or unsporting by the nature of the mechanics, so any other lineups and any amount of grief doesn't exactly fall under our definition. As much as some players may hate it, it's a little bit like saying any unwanted PvP is griefing. Of course, there's a great deal of nuance to invasions and its implementations, but on the whole, I want to state firmly that I do not think invading qualifies as griefing. What you do in an invasion, however, can absolutely be griefing. In my last video, I discussed the merits and mechanics of twinking and how I do not personally find it to be inherently a griefing strategy. That said, I don't want to excuse twinking from the possibility of griefing. When you invade at low level and use items that your opponent would not be expected to be able to counter, the common example being poison or scarlet rot, I don't think it's a stretch to consider that griefing. Then again, the same could probably be said of having any significant mechanical advantage, knowing it's extremely troublesome to counter. Is dual cross Naginatas or pikes with frost and bleed griefing just because it's really annoying and really strong? Is using starlight shards ad infinitum griefing because they're supposed to be rare items? Is using gravity magic to pull opponents off a ledge griefing because it ignores every aspect of the opponent's build and doesn't need to be aimed? There's a blurred line that potentially could frame any use of a poorly balanced or easily exploitable mechanic as griefing. Imbalance itself is a staple of invasions. The teams are lopsided, the goals are asymmetrical, the whole system is built as a secondary game within a primary. So when we consider the imbalance, we should probably consider the context to determine who exactly is griefing. If two players make fresh characters to run through Limgrave and get invaded by an invader chucking rot pots who runs away the second the proc hits, I'd say it's fair to call that invader a griefer, but that's just my perspective. It takes a fight and turns it into torture. It's underhanded because you're doing something with the knowledge that the odds sit favorably against the host being able to counter the effect. It's unsporting because it doesn't so much call for you to use a specific build quality or skill, but instead relies on the game's extremely favorable status build-up rate balanced only by limited uses. It causes grief because, well, dying to rot is a bad way to go. It puts you on a timer and ignores so many other aspects of your build that if your only goal is to survive, you better either get running to a fog gate or you might as well submit. But that's just a case where the grief comes from a target's lack of preparedness. When you invade at Radahn's Beach or just before Radagon, Morgott, or Godfrey, and there are 3 explosion spammers with no intention of fighting the boss, I think it's fair to call that griefing. It's ganking at its least sporting and makes sure invaders have as painful an experience as possible. You can blame the invader for being the aggressor, but I don't think the gankers are doing anything short of deliberately causing grief. But even then, in commonly cited worst-case scenarios, that's not where griefing becomes a problem for me. I don't love the idea of ignoring a fight through an overpowered mechanic, nor do I love the idea of making everything balanced to the point of no variance. I like to fight not knowing the odds and to come prepared for the worst, even if I'm facing certain death. I also like the idea that the gap between floor and ceiling of competitive play is tight, and even new players with basic gear have a fighting chance. Despite that feeling, I'm okay with getting poisoned to death, however unexpected, because that's what I like about these games. I'm okay with getting absolutely bodied by a gank because that's part of the charm of invasions. Sure, it gets old, but it's not over the line for me. Sometimes it's griefing, but griefing can be okay. But there is griefing that bothers me. When people stand on the edge of a cliff in Liurnia to summon invaders who can't reach them, knowing they're completely safe and can let auto-summon blues help them farm to their heart's content, that's griefing at its worst for me. When I invade and the host runs back to the grace and won't participate in the level until I am dead and gone, that's griefing at its most boring. For me, griefing becomes a real issue when it prevents engagement. It is one thing to hide and wait for an opportunity, it is another to refuse to fight. When you set yourself up for a complete lack of engagement, knowing the only possible outcome is to waste others' time, that's the griefing I hate. I don't care what cheap tactic or Simpsons hit and run method you wish to employ, I want you to participate. If you don't want to participate and your time is worth nothing to you, then I think that's a problem. I don't want people to have the way they PvP dictated any more than absolutely necessary, but if the most attractive strategies become not fighting at all, then I'm going to have a hard time arguing in favor of invasions. I think the nature of invasions and PvP more broadly give credence to all being fair in war. You can do whatever you want to win on either side, including stalling, but stalling has its limits. Stalling implies an anticipated end, like when an invader hides behind mobs to attack only when the host is under duress, or when a host holds back until the invader has been sufficiently softened by summons. But griefing can reach such disparaging lows in Elden Ring that players abuse the open world and lack of mounted travel in multiplayer to make themselves nigh invincible by placing themselves out of reach. There's no rule that prevents it, however unsporting or boring it might be, but just because a game doesn't prevent something doesn't mean it should exist. I would like to see From Software push invasions to a more serious role. Battle Royales deal with campers and hiders by continually shrinking the map to force interaction. In previous games, the areas you were restricted to were small enough that it was extremely unlikely to not run into your opponent at some point. Elden Ring has let its map bloat so much that an overworld invasion could easily be an invader on one side of the Altus Plateau and the host on the other, with nothing to force engagement. If you want to kill your opponent, sure, fight them and kill them, but if you don't think you could, or if you don't want to, why not just hide and let the level take care of them? Worst case, you've wasted everyone's time. As much as it's not how I want to play invasions, I want to highlight how little the system incentivizes any specific style of play. You invade because it's fun, and how you define fun is up to you. If you define fun as denying fun for others, you're probably a griefer, and the game condones your actions the same as anyone else's. The same is true of hosting or ganking. In so many ways, any member of the encounter can decide that they don't want to participate and avoid confrontation indefinitely, and the game allows it with what seems like complete indifference. So I want to call out Elden Ring for what I see as generally irresponsible game design. The game makes sure to give you reasons to not do things by making them inconvenient, but rarely does it incentivize you to want to do something through convenience. If I want all my upgrades on a character, then I need to play through the entire game. If I want to play with a friend, well then I have to make the trade-off of getting invaded along the way and not being able to ride my horse. I might even like all those things, but the game is punishing me regardless of how I feel by making it take longer. Elden Ring balances its gameplay by using your time as currency. If you want to trivialize a boss fight by bringing in friends, you need to wait around for their signs to show up, try to summon them, have it time out 3 times, have everyone restart their game, make sure everyone is using the right password, travel to the round table hold and back, and then eventually give up and just summon your plus 10 Dung Eater because it's already been 30 hours so you're pretty tired and just need to kill Mohg to get into the DLC. If you want to make a new build using the Dark Moon Greatsword, you need to complete the entirety of Ranni's questline, by which time you will have completed most of the things you wanted to do with said Greatsword. If you want to fight in the arena to PvP against other willing and capable players in the biggest clash you can, then you need to search for a match for the rest of your life and die before you get a 3v3 with Spirit Ashes. So by the time you get around to invasions, you're exhausted. The last thing on your mind is playing fair or being considerate of others. When it comes down to build making or multiplayer, the game does not respect your time. Elden Ring is the biggest griefer of all. And that's the core of what I want to get across. No matter how stupid or mean-spirited another player can be, they are only able to do it because of the oversights or willful negligence of the game's design. If you hate AFK farmers, if you hate Rotpot Twinks, if you hate Radon Beach Gankers, you really hate Elden Ring. Those players are griefing, and they may very well be in the wrong to do so, but they did not build this city. They are only trying to find the best ways to make sure other people have the worst time, and while that is despicable at its most basic, it is a solvable problem. But it is almost impossible to solve on the player's end. As much as we might want to believe that people can be made to not be absolute bastards, it's just not a reliable way to expect change. I know this because I am a bastard. When I'm being given a hard time by a gank squad that I just can't break, I'll go find some place to hide and go AFK. This is me doing the very griefing I find so distasteful, and I should be ashamed of myself. But I have no self-control. I need the game to force, or better yet, incentivize me to do the right thing. After an hour or two of less than inspiring invasions, when I run up against a host and their phantoms camping the grace and running anytime I engage, I get a little tilted at the idea of feeding myself to that sort of monster. When my flasks are empty and I didn't bring any quick kill strategies because I'm casual and thoughtless, sometimes I give in to my worst instincts and run as far away as possible, lay myself down, and go do something else. There is no doubt in my mind that what I'm doing is griefing. I am doing it deliberately to deny them something. I'm refusing to play ball because I'm not okay with rewarding whatever misery they've dished out to me. But is what I'm doing wrong? I wish it were so simple. I think these problems in Elden Ring are just the latest in a long line of secondary and tertiary focus. The multiplayer of Souls games, especially the PvP, has taken a backseat for too long. As these games grow in popularity and online multiplayer matures, the standout mechanics developed 15 years ago are showing their age. We need these games to incentivize players to play in a meaningful and healthy way. I need to know that if I die in a drawn-out slog of an invasion, that a better one is right around the corner. I need players to not be so unwilling to be invaded that they would rather go camping than fight in an action RPG. We can argue and snipe that everyone who doesn't do what we want is a griefer or a tryhard or a coward, but really what we should be mad about is that the game isn't giving us better ways to play, that ruining someone else's time is worth more than enriching it. But I am no fool when it comes to the most malicious aspects of the human condition. For players who draw their sole pleasure from griefing, from ruining the experience of others, for the die-hard griefers in the audience, I want to encourage you to sincerely consider alternatives. Play the way you want to be played against. I define my invasion style at its best by building characters who I think would be interesting to fight, in-game cosplays, unique weapon combinations, themed builds around lore concepts, things I would be happy to see. If I let myself pick gear on the sole condition that it be as disruptive or degrading as possible, I don't think I'd appreciate invasions nearly as much. I think players on all sides should aim to inspire awe rather than contempt. Whenever it's hard to find an invasion because activity is low, we should consider if we should have been nicer to hosts that didn't deserve to be stomped and stonewalled. We should give them a more sporting fight, encourage them to grow into a more legitimate foe, rather than squandering their innocence for a cheap kill. When we want to fight alongside our buddies but every invader separates or blocks us because they know we're spammers of the lowest sort, we should consider toning down the lasers and AoEs and maybe try playing with tactics that have some finesse to them. Maybe leave the Taunter's Tongue on and shoot for 2v2s more often. If we're getting kills through the decimation of our opponents, we can't very well expect them to reconstitute themselves as anything other than bitter. If we're wasting everyone's time, we can't expect them to want to keep playing. We need to face the reality that, in all likelihood, it will be years before we get a replacement game. After 2 years, Elden Ring PvP is not in an ideal state. Once the excitement of the DLC has waned, we're going to sink lower than ever. The DLC has allegedly confirmed a 4-player limit, and I'm all but certain we will not get an invasion zone. From Software is not going to help us at the level we need. We are on our own, as grim as that may be. It is up to us as a community to preserve and progress the PvP to the best version of itself. Even when people cross the line, even when they push us too far, we should try our best to play in a way that encourages people to join this game, rather than dismissing invasions and PvP as only for those most toxic and low. I love these games, but Elden Ring has made me concerned I am going to lose what I love about these games most. I've already lost the best parts, so if I want to have any hope of getting them back, we, as a community, need to demand it back together. There are few things more heartbreaking to me than making a video to dissect some niche aspect of the most unique multiplayer in a major release, only to have comments come up and say, no matter what, I would never PvP. I hate it, and I hate everyone who does it. I hope they remove invasions entirely. And as much as people will have that opinion no matter how much someone else caters to them, griefers are not helping. Griefers are damaging the community in ways they probably don't care about, but certainly in ways they should. Sure, sometimes people deserve to be griefed, but the next time you want to grief, the next time you want to make someone hurt at any cost, just remember what you're giving up. Remember that a game that isn't fun for everyone doesn't get attention. That's my bit on griefing, though I'm sure I could go on 100 tangents about all the specific little things that bug me. Maybe in another video. Speaking of which, if you like the video, please consider liking and subscribing, maybe leave a comment, nice or otherwise. I'm at a point in my YouTube journey where I am very actively taking feedback and criticism. I'm fast approaching 1,000 subscribers and hopefully some actual monetization, thereby eventually allowing me to leave my job and become a full-time bastard man. Thank you for watching.